The Great Depression left more than just economic scars. It shaped the very fabric of American food culture in various ways. Faced with food shortages, high prices, and rationing, families found themselves tasked with turning next to nothing into something edible. Join us in this video as we revisit 15 Depression-era foods that have since vanished from the family table. We'll be kicking things off with the Hoover Stew. The Hoover Stew is named somewhat sarcastically after President Herbert Hoover, whose administration was often blamed for the economic hardships of the Great Depression. But politics aside, Hoover Stew was a miracle in a pot for struggling families. This dish was as close to a culinary collage as you could get. You'd start with elbow macaroni, which was cheap, then toss in canned tomatoes for some flavor and color, and if you were lucky, you'd have a can of veggies like peas or corn. Finally, you'd add a few slices of hot dog or sausage. Everything simmered together into a stew that was, by all accounts, more filling than flavorful. Families cooked Hoover Stew in large batches, portioning it out to last for days. Some might say it tasted like macaroni with hot dogs, while some say it tasted like survival. Either way, it left an impression on everyone who ate it. If you think oatmeal is bland, then get ready for this popular food during the Depression era that made oatmeal look like a 5-star breakfast. Cornmeal mush was a budget-friendly dish that kept countless families fed. It wasn't just breakfast. Cornmeal mush was often lunch and dinner too. Cornmeal mush was as simple as it got. It was made by boiling cornmeal in water or milk until it thickened to a porridge-like consistency. The dish could be eaten hot or cold, sweetened with a bit of sugar, or hooked up with a dash of salt and pepper for a spicy taste. And if you were fortunate enough to have some syrup or honey on hand, well, that turned a bowl of mush into a luxury meal by Depression standards. Who says you can't find dinner in your own backyard? During the Great Depression, dandelions went from annoying weeds to prized greens, proving that when times get tough, creativity knows no bounds. Dandelion salad was a prime example of how resourceful people got when the grocery budget couldn't stretch to include fresh produce. It was free, abundant, and, if you ignored the bitterness, almost delicious. To make dandelion salad, families would pick the young, tender leaves of dandelions, which were less bitter than the older plants. These greens were then washed thoroughly and tossed with whatever dressing could be scraped up. A bit of vinegar and oil, maybe a sprinkle of salt, or even bacon grease if you were lucky. It all added up to a salad that was as much about survival as it was about flavor. In many ways, dandelion salad was a reminder of simpler times, when people relied on nature to put food on the table. Though it's unlikely you'll see it in your next restaurant salad, dandelion greens did find their way into modern cuisine as a superfood of sorts. Moving from wild plants to humble pies. This next dish was a bit of a shocker, but it just goes to show that where there's a will, there's a way. Imagine sitting down to a slice of warm spiced apple pie, only to discover there isn't a single apple in sight. Mock apple pie is a dessert that represents Depression-era ingenuity like nothing else. With apples often too pricey or unavailable, people discovered that crackers, yes crackers, could stand in for apples with a bit of culinary sleight of hand. The recipe was surprisingly simple. Layers of Ritz crackers, spiced with cinnamon, lemon juice, and sugar, were baked into a crust like a traditional apple pie. Once it was out of the oven, the crackers transformed into an apple-like texture that could fool even the pickiest eater. The lemon juice and spices did the heavy lifting in terms of flavor, mimicking the tart-sweet profile we associate with apple pie. While most of us will twist our faces in disgust from the next entry, it was one of the most popular Depression-era foods. When you think of sandwiches, peanut butter and mayo might not be the first combo that springs to mind, unless you were living in the 1930s. Peanut butter and mayo sandwiches were a solution for families trying to stretch their food budgets while adding some protein and flavors to their meals. To make this unique sandwich, you'd spread peanut butter on one slice of bread and mayo on the other, then smash them together to form a formidable sandwich. It was creamy, nutty, and unexpectedly tangy, thanks to the mayonnaise. When people were searching for ways to make their meals exciting, this combination became a popular way to keep things interesting. Because who doesn't love a little culinary adventure? When life gives you potatoes, you make potato pancakes. And lots of them. Potatoes were a dietary staple during the Great Depression, not just for their affordability, but also for their versatility. With families needing to make the most of what they had, These golden, crispy delights quickly became a favorite way to transform leftover mashed potatoes or freshly grated spuds into a meal that felt a bit more special. The process was simple. Shred or mash leftover potatoes, mix in a bit of flour and egg to bind them together, and then fry them until golden brown. The result? Crunchy on the outside, fluffy within, and absolutely scrumptious. Some families added onions or herbs for extra flavor, while others kept it classic, allowing the potato to shine in its purest form. Next on our list is navy bean soup. Few dishes from the Depression era are as comforting and iconic as navy bean soup. It wasn't just a meal, it was a lifeline for families struggling to put food on the table. Making navy bean soup was as easy as soaking the beans overnight and simmering them with a few basic ingredients, like onions, carrots, and any leftover meat if available. As the beans cooked down, they created a rich, creamy texture that made the soup feel rich without requiring much money. The beauty of this dish was in its versatility. You could adjust the seasonings and add whatever vegetables you had on hand. For the next food on our list, try to imagine eating a cake without eggs, milk, or butter. Yes, that's exactly how the eggless, milkless, butterless cake was made. When baking a cake, the ingredients typically include eggs, milk, and butter. But during the Depression era, those ingredients were often off the table, just like so many of life's little luxuries during the Depression. It was made primarily from flour, sugar, and baking soda. This cake used water, vinegar, and a bit of vanilla extract for flavor. The result was a surprisingly moist and flavorful cake that proved you didn't need fancy ingredients to create a delicious dessert. Families would bake this cake for special occasions, adding whatever was available for a personal touch. Perhaps a sprinkle of cinnamon or a drizzle of homemade frosting, if they could manage it. For noodle lovers, the Depression era was a time to try something new. With fresh ingredients scarce and tight budgets, Depression-era noodles became a kitchen hero. These simple homemade noodles were made from just two ingredients, flour and water. That's right, no eggs, no fancy spices. Families would mix flour with water to form a dough, roll it out, and cut it into strips. The noodles could be cooked right away in boiling water or dried for later use. They could be added to soups and stews or served with a simple sauce made from canned tomatoes. Bread and gravy was another popular Depression-era meal that transformed the most basic ingredients into something satisfying. This dish was the epitome of making do, proving that even stale bread could have its moments to shine, if only you added enough gravy. The concept was simple. Take leftover or stale bread, whether homemade or store-bought, and soak it in a tasty gravy made from meat drippings, flour, and water. The bread would soak up all the deliciousness, creating a dish that was not just a way to use up leftovers, but a comfort food that filled you right to your core. During the Great Depression, this meal was a staple in many households. It was a clever way to stretch a small amount of meat and make it last longer. Families would gather around the table, plates piled high with gravy-soaked bread, sharing stories and laughing while enjoying a meal. When life gives you a bounty of bell peppers, what do? If you were living in the Great Depression, you'd probably stuff them. Stuffed peppers became a resourceful way to make a meal out of whatever you had lying around. The filling for these colorful peppers consisted of a mixture of rice or breadcrumbs, leftover meats, and whatever vegetables you had on hand. If you had a can of tomatoes, that was a bonus. The stuffing would be seasoned with herbs and spices to add a little flavor and then crammed into hollowed-out bell peppers. These vibrant packets of goodness would be baked in the oven until the peppers were tender and the filling was hot and bubbly. If you thought spinach was just for Popeye, think again. Cream spinach was a dish that made greens a bit more palatable during the Depression. With fresh produce hard to come by, canned or frozen spinach became a practical choice for many households. To prepare this dish, families would heat the spinach and mix it with a simple white sauce, made from flour, milk, or water if that was all you had, and a bit of butter, or whatever fat was on hand. This creamy concoction transformed the sometimes bitter greens into a rich, flavorful side dish that could complement almost any meal. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and a pinch of nutmeg, creamed spinach was a delightful way to sneak some vegetables onto the table. It was often served alongside meatloaf or fried chicken, creating a balanced meal that felt indulgent even in tough times. The creaminess of the dish made it a favorite for many, and it became a staple at family dinners. And if you thought we were done with vegetables, next up is a dish that turned carrots into a sweet treat. When you think of pudding, carrots probably don't come to mind. Yet carrot pudding became a creative solution for families looking to stretch their ingredients and make use of whatever they had on hand. To make carrot pudding, you would start by grating fresh carrots or using whatever canned carrots you could find and mixing them with flour, sugar, and spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. Some recipes called for a splash of milk or water to bind it all together, while others might have included a bit of molasses for sweetness. The mixture would then be poured into a dish and steamed until set, resulting in a light, fluffy dessert. Families found this pudding to be a fantastic way to satisfy a sweet tooth while still being economical. It was usually served warm with a drizzle of syrup or a dollop of cream. We can't forget the ultimate comfort food, grits. While they may not have been exclusive to the Great Depression, grits became a lifeline for many, offering a filling meal that was as affordable as it was comforting. They were made from ground corn and were simple to prepare. To make grits, you boil water and add the ground cornmeal, stirring until it thickens into a creamy consistency. Most times it was served with butter and salt or syrup. Grits adapt to whatever flavors are on hand. Some families even add cheese or serve them with a fried egg on top. Finally, our last entry embodies the spirit of creativity that defined the Depression era. Nothing says vintage like a Jell-O salad. This weird dish took on a life of its own during the 1930s, when creativity and desperation combined to create the perfect dessert. The idea was simple. Dissolve flavored gelatin in hot water, then mix in whatever fruits, vegetables, or nuts you had lying around. From pineapples to grated carrots, the possibilities were endless, and the result was often tasty. Today, it remains a nostalgic nod to a time of resourcefulness, reminding us that food is not just about nourishment, but about memories and the joy of gathering around the table. Which of these Depression-era foods would you love to taste? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe and like it. See you in the next one.